I am Francesco Segala, young doctor employed here in Rome. And since 1 year, I have to say, I'm working in the COVID hospital called Columbus. So since, November 2020, I am visiting every day COVID patients, and today my plan is to share with you this experience, and I hope that you will agree to share with me your experience, and maybe we can focus on doubts, curiosities, comparisons, and I strongly invite you to ask me everything you crosses your mind at the time that question or curiosity crosses your mind. I prepared a presentation. You will see it's mainly theoretical, but I will try to make it as interactive as possible. And please feel free to interrupt me anytime you want. So now I start sharing my screen. So I know that you already know all of that, but sometimes it's very important to revise the definitions, because even for doctors who work every day on COVID, you find yourself sometimes to struggle with definitions, and they are very important because it's the backbone of everything you do afterwards, and also of the words I will use in the presentation. For example, sometimes you ask yourself, but yes, okay, this patient has a moderate COVID, but actually, what does it mean, a moderate COVID, a moderate infection? What is the exact definition? Well, it's when a patient, all the patients that we see, usually they are severe, but sometimes we say that they are not so severe, even if they are, because every patient who comes to the hospital and actually requires oxygen therapy is to be considered a severe infection. Every lung insufficiency, COVID-related, is categorized as a severe infection. So it's my cultural bias of this is also kind of I am kind of telling you my biases as a doctor, because I'm only seeing very severe cases, and also the cases I will present you at the end of the presentation will be two very severe patients. And that's kind of my bias, because we know that on average 80% of infections are non-severe, actually are mild or even asymptomatic, but which is kind of hard to estimate how many people develop an asymptomatic infection. But somehow we managed, in almost the year 2 of the pandemic, somehow we managed to make an estimate. And now we know that the majority, actually, of cases are asymptomatic or only mild, flu-like symptoms and etc. That are the vast majority of the patients you see, I believe. Then please correct me if I'm wrong, or feel free to interrupt me anytime, as I said. But me, actually, I talked with very few mild and moderate cases. Basically, my relatives and my friends who caught COVID during the first or the second wave. Actually, I'm from Turin, and at some point in the second wave, which means more or less 1 year ago, a lot of people I knew were infected, and they were mild cases, not even moderate, because moderate, it means that you have a pneumonia, but you don't require oxygen, you don't have respiratory failure. So this is the three main categories you put COVID patients. Mild, when you don't need actually a lot of medical attention, you have flu-like symptoms or like maybe some like mascolate, whatever, then moderate in which you actually have like a respiratory tract infection, like you actually have a pneumonia, but you don't require hospitalization or you don't require oxygen therapy, and then the large spectrum of severe cases, which is very important to recognize, because first is when you're a danger, a real danger to you risk your life, and then, as we will see, this difference between moderate and severe is crucial because it stands upon every decision you take. Like, speaking of therapeutic decision, medical decision, you like that's the point where things change actually for you. And then, of course, in the world of mild cases, there are also different categories. Like, asymptomatic persons is like a positive contact, which means like my aunt got infected and her nephew is positive as well, but like he would like to play, to run, to go with his friends. He doesn't feel anything, but still is positive, and his body actually encountered the virus. But this encounter between this hypothetical nephew and the virus didn't like produce any clinical symptom or any syndromic presentation. So this is asymptomatic. Then pre-symptomatic, this is very, very, very important, as we will see, because being pre-symptomatic means being super infectious, but we will see all of that. And then, okay, in the symptomatic, we can see then the difference between mild, moderate, and severe. And finally, you have post-symptomatic persons or even person who develop a syndrome, which is now known as long COVID. And we will see all of that, but just to know that they exist, because they do exist. And well, then a little bit of very basic epidemiology. Like we are in front of a true pandemic, and this is, for an infectious disease specialist, this is a very strong and interesting experience on an intellectual point of view. Like this is something that happens once in a while. Like since the beginning of the 20th century, we have seen many pandemics. We've seen the flu, the famous Spanish flu, like 100 years ago, but then also other strains like the swine flu, the avian flu. Or then we see the coronavirus, is SARS, MERS, but also other pandemics like the one of HIV, or like a very strong event that shape human culture somehow. And this one that we are living now, it's one of them, absolutely. Like we are now seeing a global death toll of almost 5 million people, which means that 5 million people like died. And we know that we died being with the infection, like COVID-19. Then, as you know, like the definition of dying from COVID or dying with COVID is a little bit controversial, but still, those are the people who were diagnosed. And yes, and as you can see, the highest burden is in the at least for now, was in Europe, North and South America, and in India mainly. But like I've seen that like I've taken my data on the Johns Hopkins website, and I've seen that so far in Uganda only a little more than 100,000 people got infected, and only 3,000 people, they, as far as the Johns Hopkins University tells, died. And do you think that those data are, if not true, at least seemingly true?
Yes, is a question. They say that in Uganda we had so far 122,000 and 3,000 deaths. He's asking if it's true.
Dr. Francesco?
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the figures, I believe those are estimates, but in my own opinion, they are very low. They are far less from what you see. Certainly tracking all the cases has been very hard for the country nationally.
Okay, all right.
Let alone in terms of the deaths, which is here reflected at 3,000. It's an estimate, but those who were not in government hospitals designated to handle COVID, for instance, were missed out. So that is not exactly the number that we have or that we know.
And do you feel that because of your personal experience?
Yes, personal experience, and also in terms of the numbers which were reported at the height of the second surge at that time, in terms of admissions. These numbers, of course, needed to be taken centrally for it to be recognized. But for instance, in the facility where I am, I don't think these deaths that we had in the facility at that time was actually factored in. Maybe other causes, but not exactly COVID.
Okay. Yeah, because that's my field too, and it's very interesting to know your point of view, your perspective, because first you are healthcare workers, and second you actually live there. And there is a growing body of literature that says that COVID cases in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, are vastly undercounted. And I will try to, but it's very interesting for me to ask you this question actually, before I'm going on with my presentation. Well, because actually the difference is this one, like the difference between the case fatality rate and the infection fatality rate. Because the first one is very easy to calculate, like is you take the number of infections, of diagnosed infections, like the number of people who resulted positive to a microbiologic test, which might be an antigenic test or a molecular test, and you put them under you put as a denominator, and then at the the first member of your equation is the number of deaths among the people who were first diagnosed, and then you make a proportion out of it. And this proportion is the crude case fatality rate. But as you can see, this doesn't mean that this is the true burden of the pandemic in that area. And the turning point is the number of tests, of course, and the number of people who are referred to get the test. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember that we lived a very odd moment. I can say so because now it feels very, very strange, like we were, but at the time it didn't feel at all, in which at some point at the high cultural level, at the political level, we were asking ourselves, but how many tests we should make? Is it better to make less tests or more tests? Like this was a question that it was lingering. We didn't know the answer, even if maybe today it feels odd, but at the time, making more tests could mean closing, restricts put higher restriction in some areas. I remember that we here in Italy we had an experience of very localized restrictions. Every region managed its own restrictions according to its epidemiology, and making more tests could mean having more cases, and then closing more bars or cinemas or activities, or even closing people at home. And of course, people politicians didn't want to do that, because in terms of it means an economic loss, as we all know. And so this was actually a true conversation that we were having. But anyway, it's now we know that the more the tests you do, the better it is, because the best way to stop a pandemic, of course, is to stop testing. But this is completely, it will be completely disgraceful, because at some point, the true burden of the pandemic emerges somehow. Like people get sick, even if they are not tested, they still get sick and they still die from COVID. And testing is very important, because is the base, like is the standpoint when you do from where you do all your evaluation in terms of public health. By the way, like in this slide, you can find a comparison between the case fatality rate of SARS-CoV. This is like a up-to-date, like it's an up-to-date estimate made from like cases all over the world. So countries who are doing more tests, they draw down the percentage, and countries who are making who are doing smaller effort in testing, they bring it up, because a lot the cases who are diagnosed, then they are the most severe. So like the case fatality rate goes up. Like there are people who are more likely to die from the beginning. The people who get tested are people who are more likely to die from the beginning somehow. So since it's a percentage, it goes up. And as you can see, this data impressed me, because as you can see, it's quite severe. I mean, is a kind of a shocking data. Like it's 10% more or less. But this is kind of this is more or less the answer, because at the very beginning of the pandemic, like we know that a lot of cases went underreported, and that's the effect of the under-testing. Because as you can see, Italy was the first, outside of China, was the first country to be involved in the pandemic at the very beginning. At some point, the case fatality rate in Italy went to peaked at 15%, which is enormous. Even still today is very high, but it's more kind of result of the composition of our population, which is a very old population, but still it's like the crude case fatality rate in Italy is moved by what happened at the beginning, like that we didn't do a lot of tests, but still a lot of people who were diagnosed died. And as you can see, this pattern was reproduced more or less in the others, also in all over the world. And today we are doing more tests, and the case fatality rate went down. But speaking about the infection fatality rate, which is the real extension of the disease, this is where like the estimates are made out of this is a paper from the World Health Organization, and like it's much harder to make this kind of estimates. And actually, most of the time you have to follow a cohort, and but we can see that the infection fatality rate is much lower. Like the estimation says that it varies, of course, from the extension from the pandemic moment. We can say, like, if you have more cases, more or less the infection fatality rate goes up in part from what we said, in part for other reasons, but actually is, as you can see, it's around 1%, more or less, between 0.5 and a little more than 1%. This is the people you expect to die if everybody gets COVID. Like, let's say, between 0.5 and 1.5%. But, and also, like, another way to estimate the true burden of the pandemic, it's what is called the excess mortality. This is a very, very crude estimate, because what you do is that you take the people you expect to die in one particular year according to how many people died in previous years, and you see how many deaths more than the expected you had. And as you can see, the 2020, it was horrific in terms of excess mortality. This goes for Italy, like, and the worst part was around March, April 2020. This was like when it really impacted, and at that time, like, I remember that our sanitary system had to be completely rearranged. That was a moment where I wouldn't say every day, but every week we were facing a new scenario with new strategies. And at the time, we didn't have a lot of idea of what to do. Like, we didn't know what to wear. Like, we didn't know if it was better a surgical mask or a filtering mask. We didn't know, like, how long we should isolate those patients. We didn't know anything because it was new, actually. And that's the time where also, in terms of excess mortality, it's the hardest. And this one is the second wave, like fall, winter 2020. After the summer, when people were saying that COVID was about to vanish, actually didn't. It was partially, like, of course, it's multifactorial, but it was mainly responding to the restriction, the very severe restriction we put in the previous months. Very effective and severe restrictions, yeah. But when you speak about the burden of COVID-19, you don't only speak about, like, the deaths, but also all the repercussions in the culture and the economics. And, like, that's something that is very concerning, especially for developing countries, because, of course, when you have to focus your resources on a pandemic, that impacts poverty, and those are some projections, and you can see that this is the projection on the global number of people falling on extreme poverty, which is defined, if I don't remember, in this article, is defined being below $2 per day, something like that. I remember if $2 or $3 per day. Well, and as you can see in the pre-COVID scenario was, like, we were seeing a positive trend towards a reduction of people living in extreme poverty, and now from COVID on, like, it went worse. Like, those are three scenarios, but, like, we can see a very clear picture of reverse of the trend. And in, like, unfortunately, sub-Saharan Africa is where extreme poverty where it knows the highest burden, and where the impact of the pandemic will be the worst. I don't know. Also here, I'm curious to know your point of view on that. I don't know if you're already seeing some consequences of the pandemic in terms of people living in poverty, or your experience, or, like, economic drawbacks.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, Dr. Francesco. Is that a question for us to give our views?
If this, like, projection actually supports your personal experience or not? Support I or not?
On the personal point of view, it seems to be the same case, because notably from last year in March 2020, when the lockdown was imposed, the socioeconomic status generally across the country declined, as observed by people who lost their jobs, especially in the private sector, where people are employed based on probably the revenue they generate in those companies. And so when COVID came around, issues of first of all, movement of goods was a problem across borders and so forth. So most people actually lost their source of revenue in terms of losing their jobs. So it's a clear picture here that actually people become more poorer in the last 2 years as a direct impact of COVID-19.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Also, please feel free to stop me anytime because
fine. The other point is of course in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, when you have a loss of revenue in family, in households, then you know that also gender-based violence is also going to increase, and that was the case anyway. Multiple factors have been observed across the country. Dropout of schools, especially the girl child, early pregnancies, which actually continue to be a very big problem. And I think us as a facility, together with the partners we work with, those are some of the critical areas we need to come in to see how to address them by us having this kind of activity that we shall start tomorrow. We need to focus at these, the target population of a reproductive age group. Some of them we may be surprised to find that actually they are below such ages and they're now carrying pregnancies as a direct effect of COVID.
Thank you. That's very interesting what you said, because like maybe the highest burden of the pandemic is exactly there where you said, like in the worsening of gender-based violence, of unemployment, of analphabetization. Also, this is because what we can see with an acute disease or an acute pandemic, actually you count the people who get sick and the people who die, but then the consequences of a pandemic, they go along for years because of the loss of all the resources that were in place before. And yeah, that's very interesting because it's very actual and it's very urgent. I believe that it's almost as urgent as to react to these situations that you mentioned. It's almost as urgent as find like an oral antiviral to stop the viral replication early. Like it's this is what we are called to face right now in this phase of I believe of the pandemic. So thank you. Well, and this is something that I know that you already know, like this is a conversation about inequalities, of course, but as you know, like we are in the high income countries. Almost everybody who consent to vaccination is now vaccinated, and we are already speaking about a third dose for what we call the super fragile population. And when like people living in low income countries, they barely reach the 1%. This is something that the World Health Organization called a moral tragedy. Like, and I completely agree with that. But there is a at the end of the presentation, we'll discuss that the thing that the vaccines are not the only thing, but still, like, I think it's important to recognize the burden of the inequalities, because, like, also here is the standpoint for any potential intervention or solution in this on this side. Well, and then that's something that always triggered my imagination. Why COVID was so successful? It's like this in this slide there is a part of the solution, but in your opinion, what are the secrets of this virus? I mean, why it spread all around the world in such an efficient way? What is your point of view?
Personally, I would say I think it's properties in terms of adapting, first of all, to the climate, the weather that cuts across the world, and I think that is invested in its ability to mutate at such a rate, and probably that's why it was able to spread successfully. In quotes, let me say.
So you said mutations. Well, yes, like the ability of the virus to mutate. That's a point. Yes, that's part of the reason. Then, other potential reasons.
The others, I think, it's basically the genetic variation of individuals. I'm just thinking out of the box, because why I would say this is different people would tolerate it differently. People you'd think are vulnerable as opposed to the initial literature, for example, you find that actually some of them may not show symptoms at all. For example, children, they may not. So in terms of it being spread, I said that those who are symptomatic are actually super spreaders. So this is stuck to the lifestyle of humans.
Okay. So we said the ability of the virus to mutate, so to adapt to its host. And the proportion of people who don't super important, because if you know if they are sick, you cannot do anything to contain the diffusion. Okay. And then other ideas.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't imagine any other really, other than that. Other than properties of a virus. Where it can exist in several forms.
Yeah. No. But actually, those are both very, very important reasons why SARS-CoV-2 is such a successful virus. You said the ability of the virus to mutate. Yes, that's true, but the ability to mutate, which is more typical of the RNA virus like SARS-CoV-2, is it's very important because it helps the virus to spread. And in terms of epidemiology, you make a very easy calculation, which is the basic reproduction number, which is an intrinsic property of the pathogen. And it's the number of the people who gets infected from an initial case. Like today, I discovered that I am sick, and let's see in my infectious window how many people I will infect. That's the basic reproduction number, and this is a little bit different from the R-Conti, because the R-Conti is what we see in a special moment. The basic reproduction number, it's kind of an intrinsic property of the pathogen itself, of the infectious agent, because some viruses are more contagious than others, and this is something which is very peculiar of the pathogen we are facing. And then there is the disease generation time, which is something a little bit harder to guess, I would say. Is the time interval that intercurs between two infections. Like today, I meet my friend. I go to my friend's house to drink a beer, and I got infected from him. He doesn't know he's sick. And from today, how much time passes before I infect another person? And if you combine those two data together, the basic reproduction number and the disease generation time, more or less you can estimate in how much time the pandemic doubles. Like today I have 4 cases. You can estimate in how much time I will have 8, then 16, then 32 cases. And that's the core of the famous exponential line. But then there is another thing that you guessed, and it's super, super, super important. I'm very happy that you said it, that proportion of people who are infecting other people without being symptomatic. This is super important. Like, I wouldn't say it's the most important thing, but maybe it is the most important thing, because you can do, if you don't know that the person in front of you is sick, you can do nothing. There is nothing you can do to stop it, or to prevent it, or to contain the pandemic. And what you see on the left side of the slide here, it's a super interesting like graph of comparing also some diseases. This is SARS, not SARS-CoV-2, it's SARS-CoV-1, let's say. And like on the x-axis, you have the proportion of people that transmit the infection before being symptomatic, and on the vertical axis, you have the R0, the basic reproduction number. As you can see here, what you find very, very impressive is the place of HIV, I think, because it's not so contagious itself. Like, actually, as you know, HIV transmission itself is quite hard. Like, but the thing that made it impossible to contain in any scenario, like in any statistical mathematical projection, was that almost the totality of patients of the infections are acquired before the case 1 becomes symptomatic, because and that made this pandemic absolutely like impossible to prevent and to control. Like, and yeah, so for COVID, we will see. Right, okay, this is another like another way to portray the R0. And as you can see, like, this is an intrinsic property. So every pathogen has its own. This one, it's estimated, like, this slide comes from, it was May, when I collected it, May 2021. So, like, it changed it. Like, it's not, it changed a little bit. Do you know why?
The picture is not so clear here, but
you don't see it?
It's quite small. You could start again. You could just repeat that again. In terms of the cursor, where the cursor is moving, for me to see.
Okay, so here you have a picture where a representation of the basic reproduction number, and you can see that, for example, for measles, almost every contact gets infected. Like, every contact, if I have measles, I infect almost every single contact I have. Like, it's super, super contagious. Like, for example, MERS appeared to be, like Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which is also a coronavirus, appeared to be not so contagious, and that's part of the reason why it's self-limited in that particular geographical area. It was 0.8. And here we find that when I made this slide, like more or less, like 5-6 months ago, the basic reproduction number estimated the average of COVID-19 was 2.5. But this is not the basic reproduction number we see today. In your opinion, why? What changed from 6 months ago to, like, let's say from 9 months ago to today?
Would I be right to say the variants?
Yeah, exactly, yes. And and more precisely, the appearance of the Delta variant, which is by far the most contagious one. And we can see that in terms of selective pressure, like, it goes as the most prevalent variant everywhere it arrives. And the Delta variant arrives, and in 3 weeks' time, like 1 month's time, it's by far the most prevalent variant, because of an intrinsic property of this new variant, which is actually, it can be represented as an augmentation of the basic reproduction number, because then the other three categories that the three properties that we defined before are more or less the same for the Delta variant. The disease generation time is more or less the same. The infective window, as far as we know, is more or less the same, which goes from -2. And -2 is very important because it's the trick, is one of the trick of the virus. The thing that it's estimated that the largest part of infections you transmit the virus mostly before the symptoms start. Like, also because the virus is clever in this way, like the quantity of virus present in your body peaks at the days -1, which means that if tomorrow let's say that today I'm sick, that I am infected, but I don't know, tomorrow I will start feeling a little bit tired, or I will develop a little bit of fever. Okay, today I'm infecting the highest number of people, so which is very tricky, and it's part of the secret. But what changed actually in the last months is that we encountered a variant which is intrinsically more contagious, for some reasons that, if you want, we can discuss. But that's well, yeah. Then I put the same number for Ebola, also a disease that you know very well, which is another virus. But as you can see, like in terms of ERCON 0, is not very different from the original variant of COVID, more or less around 1.52. But in terms of, and the disease generation time also is longer. So which means that it's slow. It's a slow epidemic. It's at least it's slower than COVID-19. But the real difference is there again. The trick that.
Excuse me, Dr. Francesca.
Yeah.
My question is in terms of the explanation with the Ebola.
Yeah.
In terms of survivors unknowingly infecting other people after some time.
Yeah. I see. That's another aspect of Ebola. But maybe you know more than me on this side. This is, yeah, you speak about those people who actually recovered, but they are still infectious. Like you speak about this population, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, this is, as far as I know, I'm trying to answer you, as far as I know, what we did today is that we demonstrated that it's possible, but apparently it doesn't affect that much the epidemiology, which means that is a very, very small proportion of transmissions. Also because is as far as I remember, is basically a sexual transmission, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's as far as we know, and as far as I know, most of all, it doesn't affect the course of the epidemic that much. But the thing is more, the point I wanted to make is more here. The thing that you start to be in Ebola, you start to be infectious the day you develop symptoms. I mean, typically symptoms of Ebola are very hard symptoms, like you develop such a strong syndromic illness that you are like, you stay at home, you don't go around like playing football or doing marathon. Imagine that what it was believed for some time in Italy to be the case 1. It was a person from Milan who, when it was infections, he did a marathon, like he ran tens of kilometers and then like spreading his infections like a super spreader. That doesn't happen with Ebola, and which is there. And then, as you said, like other factors that intervene in this scenario, this is a simplification, of course, are the capability of the pathogen to mutate, the way of transmission, and of course close contacts, it's harder to transmit that droplet or aerosol. And then also, of course, human activities. That's very, very, very important, because part of the success of the pandemic is because of the globalization and how it's easy today to travel from one country or even one continent to another, which is something that even like 56 years ago, it was not imaginable, such a fast, almost instant spread all over the world. Yeah. And here we come to transmission. Like there was a question, I don't know if you underwent the pre-test, but there was a question about transmission of COVID. That was a tricky question, I admit, because it's like it was more explorative. I wanted, because actually there are still some point to explain about transmission. And first, we believed that it was only droplets. Okay, I remember in during the first wave in March, April 2020, we were visiting patients only with the surgical mask, and people got infected like that. So that was not sufficient. Then a lot of focus was put on fomites and environmental contamination and direct contacts. Like we became crazy with hand washing, which is very, very important. Please do that. Just to say that it's like it was a process, the discovery of COVID transmission, the ways. And then at some point, like we started talking about aerosols, because there was something was not going, like also the modalities of the super spreading events, as you mentioned, were not fully explained. Why they were all inside, why it was so harder to spread the disease outside instead of inside, and all of a sudden we understood that we made a huge mistake not to consider aerosols and not to prioritize ventilation when we speak about COVID transmission, and we speak about avoiding a super spreading event. Like actually, as far as I know, like there is no. I read a very interesting and well-written review on Annals of Internal Medicine, maybe a little bit old now, but when this review was written, and if like I will write you my email address on the chat, and feel free to write me if you want some sources or some articles, or feel free to contact me. I can send it to you. And at the time that review was written, was more or less 1 year ago, no one single super spreader event was demonstrated indoor, or at least in a place outdoor, or at least in a place where an indoor overcrowding situation was not conceived. Let's say a concert. There was always like a bar or indoor place where like people could gather and the super spreading event could explode. So, and today we know that this is very important. Like we experienced it somehow on our personal experience. And this is on the left, actually on the right side of the slide, you find another way to represent what we just said, like the period of infectiousness is limited in time because it's an acute disease, and which is not the period you are positive. The period you are positive is the continued line. So it's like being positive doesn't always mean being infectious. Because if you have a good immune system, your window of infectiousness is believed to be, like, as we said, between the days -2 and the days 7, 8, according to referring to the days the symptoms started. Okay, this is I put it just for the beauty of it, because it's a very nice representation of the first cases in Wuhan. Like, and this is a representation of the people who spread the disease at the beginning. And as you can see, few people are this is like the color dots, are responsible of a lot of secondary cases. Then the estimation says that actually 50% of infected people is actually responsible of 80% of cases, which is enormous. That's still a little bit like, still a little bit surprising when I think about it, because there is, you have to, like, some people with a very active social life, who are meeting a lot of people, maybe who are doing a lot of like indoor events, either for work or for like social activities. Those people actually manage to spread the disease a lot. And a lot of other people, like all the other people, the other, let's say 20%, the other, like, let's say 70 or 80% of the population, they infect few people, like households, let's say. And this is very important to understand, because it's a key concept about COVID transmission. And then, like, I think that we have until 4. Okay, so it's a very long presentation. And pathophysiology, I remember, was a mystery for a long time, but still it's very important, because all our, as we will see in some minutes, all the therapeutic decisions are taken upon the pathophysiologic moment. If you, I remember that at some point everybody was listening to this presentation of a very well-known and estimated professor in Italy, who teaches in Bologna, the University of Bologna, who were projecting this slide in which there were basically 3 phases of COVID. The first phase was the viral phase. The second phase was the hyperinflammatory phase. And the third phase was the recovery phase. And I think that that was the first wave. This was like April 2020. But somehow all the studies that came afterward confirmed this, more or less, this skeleton, this backbone of the pathophysiology. And that's super important, because, like, at first there is the virus replication. Like, viruses enters, like, you encounter the virus enter your body, like with this receptor, the ACE2 receptors, it goes into the lungs, into the alveoli, and it starts replicating in this setting. And this is typically where you feel the typical, like, flu-like symptoms, or muscle ache, and like intense fatigue, fever. This is where you have fever. Typically, the patients we see, like almost all the patients we see in the hospital, are patients who they just got over this phase. Like, it's very rare, like, it's not very rare, but it's kind of uncommon to treat a patient who has fever for several days, because fever is more a symptom of the viral phase. And when you develop the pneumonia, you are already in the second phase. You're in the hyperinflammatory phase, which is this one, like, is the one on the B panel of the slide. When you go to the hospital, usually when you find troubles in breathing, like difficulties in breathing. And at that time is likely that the most part of viral replication is done. The viral replicated as much as possible and trigger the immune responses at a level that actually harms the host body somehow. And this is typically the patients have fever for the first 2 or 3 days of the hospitalization. Then they do not have fever anymore, but they have a worsening respiratory deficiency. Yeah, you want to ask me something? Okay, I heard the microphone being turned on. Then please feel free to interrupt me anytime you want. Okay. And at this time, okay, I don't know how curious you are about all the molecular mechanisms that like sustain this process. But the thing to understand is that there is a completely disproportionate inflammatory response that goes with both humoral and cellular inflammatory response. So you find a lot of inflammatory cells, white blood cells, like gathering themselves into the lungs and releasing cytokines, the molecules of inflammation. Typically, the most important one, we will see why, because we have a therapeutic reflection of this. The most important one are interleukin 1 and 6. And yeah, you find your lungs full of edema. You find your vessels also in troubles because like the inflammation goes with a hypercoagulatory state. And then you find yourself that even in the third phase, the phase of the recovery, sometimes this recovery is functional, but some other times, as it happens with the scars on the skin, is not that functional. It goes with fibrosis and a loss of lung function because a fibrotic pneumocyte, I mean, if a fibrotic alveoli is an alveoli which is not able anymore to do its job, or to exchange gas with the environment. And this is a small slide that's like, we have seen that one important thing to understand with the COVID pathophysiology is that in the most severe cases, you lose your mechanism of compensation, both on the cardiovascular side and also on the respiratory side, because if you find your lungs full with liquid, with edema, is a condition that at the extreme is called IRDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. And this is the syndrome of people going to the intensive care units. In this situation, the lungs are not able anymore to expand. You lose the pulmonary compliance, which is called. So you already have few space to use, and the space cannot be expanded anymore. And then also you lose the cardiovascular compensation because you suffer from both from an endothelial damage and also for a situation in which like your cardiopulmonary system it's not able anymore to, let's picture it like that lungs and heart together are facing a situation in which they cannot manage anymore to deliver the oxygen to the body. And as you can imagine, this is very tricky if you are pregnant, because like already the pregnancy undergoes a lot of physiological adaptation that's like puts in a stress the cardiopulmonary system, because you don't have a lot of space to expand your lungs, and then also you have to I mean the heart has to pump a little bit stronger than usual, and this goes along with a lot of also physiological adaptations that goes into the microvascular system, and you find yourself also in a situation in which you are more prone to coagulation. So the key message of this slide is that if you are pregnant, it's better not to catch COVID. But still it's also the role of asymptomatic infection. It appears to be a little bit more pronounced than in the general population. And part of the explanation might be that pregnant women, they go also among the physiological adaptation, they go also, they face an immunological, they are more resilient on the immunological side. So like they are more tolerant. And that can be at least in part why they are more tolerant also to the severe disease, which let's not forget, it's a situation in which you are overreacting to an infection. And by the way, if it happens to you to have a pregnant patient, like steroids are absolutely safe. And if don't hesitate to use them if a pregnant woman comes with a respiratory distress, or especially if she requires oxygen, like don't hesitate to give steroids, and like. But also keep in mind that the key message is that because of those physiological adaptations, pregnant women are more at risk for severe infection than non-pregnant women of the same like age, the same like risk factors. Of course, then if you are pregnant and you have diabetes or hypertension, that it like risks sums, but let's say on the same risky level, they face very important, like they should be treated with a particular consideration. And well, please also feel free to interrupt me if like I say something that you already know or that you find boring, because this is kind of boring. Like also other definitions, and that might be that they are important, but if you already know them and you find them boring, please feel free to interrupt me, because like that's the thing that I believe that everybody of you faced already several times, maybe hundreds of times, when the person in front of me is a suspect case. And the answer is quite easy, is when like you have symptoms first, so all the symptoms we told, flu-like and respiratory distress, and when you are a contact of a known case. Okay, if somebody of your households or of your friends or the people you met, you know that they had COVID, okay, even if you are asymptomatic, you are a suspect. And then of course, if you develop symptoms that require hospitalization, also in that case, even if you are not a contact, but you are present with a very compatible syndrome, you should consider it, and you should be placed upon like suspicion, and that which means that you have to perform a diagnostic test if you can. And okay, so a very straight questions. How many people of you never wear all this stuff, the full set of PPE?
Rarely.
Which means that you rarely wore them. There is somebody among you that never wore them?
Yeah.
Okay. So I strongly suggest you to recover my slide and to click on this YouTube video, which is a homemade video that we made more than 1 year ago, during the first wave, yes, in the first half of 2020, that like we describe how to dress, how to undress. But the key concept is that you should wear all this stuff. Ideally, you should wear all this stuff every time you meet a suspect case. So either somebody who has a clinical syndrome and you don't know if it's a contact or not, or because maybe his household or his contacts didn't get tested or whatever, or you meet somebody who maybe is asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, but is living in the same house with a with a confirmed case. You should always wear that for yourself, to self-protect yourself. And if you don't have all of this stuff, please prioritize a filtering mask, which is by far the most important thing. And then another thing you should do is to protect your mucous membranes, because if there is some place that virtually SARS-CoV-2 could stick and enter into your body, is not through the skin, but it's through the mucous membranes. So, but please prioritize a filtering mask. If you don't have them, an alternative, which is a suboptimal alternative, still is an alternative, is to put 2 surgical masks. But I strongly recommend you to keep your own filtering mask, either FFP2 or N95, whatever, with you as your personal equipment. And every time you ask yourself about might it be COVID, wear it at that precise time. And then when you visit a confirmed case, yeah, it will be like what we do is that we wear all of that. Do you right now? Do you have how is it going with the PPI availability? Do you have them, or like you have troubles in finding them? How is it going?
No, we have actually we received a donation from Italy, Uganda, so we have. Consider that in these the facilities like ours is impossible to separate COVID and non-COVID. How is done in Italy?
Okay. But so you are still you are forced to recover patients together, COVID and non-COVID.
Excuse me, Dr. Francesco, could you repeat the question again?
Okay, the question is, so the situation is that you are forced to like putting COVID patient and non-COVID patient in the same room?
No, not at all. And that's why we, as Dr. Daniela said, we had to come very fast, especially in the second wave, where the numbers were very high, to find a way of subjecting almost everyone to rapid tests to identify them and put them in separate rooms.
Every hospitalized patient, let's say?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Very well. Okay. And for all the confirmed cases you visited in your personal experience, you were wearing all of that?
We were wearing all of that, of course, eventually with the donations, but prior to that, of course, there were challenges.
Also for us.
Yeah.
It's still challenging today to wear all this stuff.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Maybe if I can add, my department, that is radiology, we were assessing both COVID and non-COVID every day because it was not possible to separate them.
Okay, but one at a time.
One at a time, but during the second wave, the corridor were full of patients.
Okay, I see. Okay. Yes. Oh, it's completely understandable. Like it's also, I think that every health system all around the world faced some constraints and some situations not, suboptimal at least. Well, it's this is one of the core struggles of the pandemic. I would see the unexpected part. But by the way, it's the thing you're not ready to face. And also believe me, our healthcare system was not at all ready to face that. Well, and also some very fast consideration with diagnosis, because then I'd like to present you a couple of cases. Okay, this is the wide spectrum of the diagnostic tools that we have. And the key message is that, like most of the diagnostic tests that we do, they are actually diagnostic tests, which means that what they do is that they differentiate. They are able to tell which one is a confirmed case and say, okay, this one has COVID. If you are PCR positive and antigen test positive, okay, you are, as far as I know, you are a confirmed case. but they don't tell us, like, they don't tell us how sick you will become. I mean, they are not prognostic tests. They don't, as we said, after a while, they don't even tell you if you are infectious or not anymore. So it's very important to know to know how to read those tests. And for example, serologists, they are not even able to make a diagnosis anymore because vaccines came. And today, if I have a super high serology, it's more likely that I am not a COVID case, but a vaccinated person, at least in our country. And whatever, but I think that you already know all of that. Like one of our struggle, and which still is, are all those people that don't become negative, that don't, as we say, non negativizzano, like very long haulers. But what we understood is that these positive tests, after a while, if you have like a strong immune system and you are an otherwise healthy person, at some point, what you get is some genetic material which is not a reflection of a replicating virus, but it's just a piece of DNA that the PCR detects. And okay, again, the difference between mild and moderate illness, and which is the very important difference between a patient that you should like follow, that requires medical attention, and a patient that you can follow even on an outpatient setting. Or like when I was following my friends and my parents who in turn were sick of COVID, I was calling them every day, for example. But if someone of them got a positive like radiography, that changed, because like people with pneumonia require a different kind of attention. You need them to be monitored also in terms of respiratory function. So you, if you can, you should monitor them with a peripheral oxygen saturimeter. And if you see that they develop symptoms or signs of respiratory distress, that's where the disease becomes severe and they require hospitalization, which means that because they are very likely to require oxygen, like at that very moment. But also another very important thing is that I don't approach all my parents at the same way. Like I don't call, let's say, with the same frequency my cousin and my grandma. I call my if I know that my grandma is positive, I call her 2 or 3 times per day, because my grandma, she's 80 years old, she smoked for 20 years, she's got diabetes. And like I call them 3 times per day, because what we understood and what is something that is very, very true is that if you are on a higher category, on a higher risk category, it's far more likely that you develop a severe disease that requires hospitalization. And again, pregnant women must be called, let's say, 2 or 3 times per day. And yeah, even if they are mild, well, the message here is that some categories of people, even if they have mild symptoms, they need a special attention. And those categories that you see here, like immunodepressed patients, chronic lung disease patient, cardiovascular patients suffering from cardiovascular disease, cancer, obesity, of course, old people. Now we have a new category, which is here in Italy, which is again unvaccinated people, but it's a little bit different because usually they are young, but still today is a category that you should consider. We always ask, are you vaccinated or not? But even people who are vaccinated, now we see that again, these factors for severe disease, they are still very important. They are still very important, even if in a in a highly vaccinated population, because we are admitting right now a lot of people with the so-called breakthrough infections, because of course they are not a magic vaccines, even if we would like to believe that they are not magic bullets, then I mean magical drugs. So like you still can develop infections, especially if you belong to those categories at higher risk for developing a severe disease. Well, we can skip that because you already said so. And let's speak about the medical management. But first, for these last 20 minutes of lessons, like I would like to ask you more or less per week, how many people with COVID you treat?
You said in the next month?
No, in the per week, like every week, how many people with COVID you treat, more or less?
Right now, we don't have any COVID cases. Actually, the numbers were high in the facility, in the whole facility. The numbers were high at the peak of it, and that was June this year. And I think in a week we had over 10 patients at the height of the second wave.
Okay.
Yeah.
And 10 patients per week.
Yes, more or less. But in terms of, I must say that the peak, the times that we had the most number of patients was in a span of about 3 weeks. And in these 3 weeks, if you compare inpatients of about 60 patients, and then an outpatient, those who are treated from out were over 100. Just to give you the sense of urgency that it created within a span of 3 weeks, that in actual sense, it would only take a well-prepared setting of a facility to handle such. So it was really very stressful. That's what I want to say, because we are overwhelmed by the numbers.
Yeah, I see. I perfectly see what you're saying. Yeah. And at that time, what were you doing? Like, which drugs were you using?
In terms of the drugs we're using, I think we were basically using what we thought was being used elsewhere, and also based on the literature that we were reading. But most especially, most of these literatures were either proven not to be correct. For example, azithromycin, mainly azithromycin. But then even then, because of the market that we have, the nature of market we have in sub-Saharan Africa, it drove azithromycin out of the market before having it being very expensive. So eventually we found ourselves using other options for antibiotics. But most importantly, we had zinc, vitamin C, yes. And in particular cases, a few cases that presented, let's say, with blood clots of any nature, then would tailor and give heparin, let's say, anticoagulant. We're using heparin mainly. And also corticosteroids in a few selected cases. We're very, very cautious on using corticosteroids, especially dexamethasone, because of the other side effects. And clearly, a majority of the patients, the older patients, let me say 50 and above, that we encountered, most of them had, as you said, non-communicable underlying conditions. So, for example, like diabetes, and of which we needed to be very careful in terms of titrating corticosteroids. Yeah, I think that's really where, and oxygen therapy, of course, where necessary, where we gauge that they were not responding to room air temperature oxygen concentrations. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's what I today, like at the beginning we were like therapeutic approach to COVID-19, as you know, it changed a lot. And today we are following basically the guidelines developed by the NIH, and which are more or less the international reference of how to treat COVID. And again, the distinction is from mild cases and moderate to severe cases, or no, more precisely from moderate to severe cases. I mean, the most important difference is, on a clinical standpoint, is the oxygen requirement. Like for people who require oxygen, there is a certain set of very precise things to do. And for people who don't require oxygen, who breathe well in room air, there is another set of possibilities. But all the therapeutic, let's say that the highest part by far of the therapeutic attention must be given for the subset of population who presents with oxygen, an oxygen requirement. So first, this is the first thing you have to assess. You have in front of you a confirmed case, and the first thing you have to assess is this person in a situation of respiratory distress. If the answer is no, what you can do is there is not a lot to do, actually, because unfortunately a lot of therapies that we used in a first phase of the pandemic either revealed themselves useless or revealed themselves harmful. And for example, all the antiretroviral drugs that we were using at the beginning, drugs taken from the HIV therapies, they revealed themselves to be harmful because they added toxicity to, and they didn't provide any benefit. And especially if they were given in combination with azithromycin, like because there is people like we experienced a sum in cardiovascular toxicity, and like more people who were doing this therapy actually died than people who didn't do that because of the elongation of the QT interval. Like, and actually now here we use those drugs which are basically in like monoclonal antibodies, and they kind of act as antivirals, let's say, because what they do is that they attach to the virus surface, and they prevent it to enter into your cells. But those are very difficult drugs we find troubles in availability with these drugs even here in Italy. So the thing I want to tell you today is, I mean, not how to use monoclonal antibodies, because like they are very expensive drugs, but how not to use other drugs, because antibiotics are not recommended, and especially macrolides are not recommended, and and also, as you said, dexamethasone, corticosteroids are, if you don't require oxygen, they not only that they are not useful, but they might be harmful. So that's like it's the hypothesis is that like they more somehow help viral replication because you intervene maybe in too much an early phase. If you don't have, like, what we know, and from a very solid evidence, is that you are supposed to give dexamethasone to every patient who has a respiratory failure, because at that point you have a clear benefit, like regardless from the age or from the burden of non-communicable diseases. Okay, if in front of you there is a very hard to manage diabetic patient, like this is a concern. Of course, it's a concern. But my suggestion would be to consider always if he or she, if your patient, even if he's diabetic, requires oxygen because of COVID-19, you should always consider steroids, and you should administer them because like they save lives. I mean, today we know that steroids save lives to people who don't breathe well with COVID. That comes from very strong evidence. And again, here, when you give them, this is again recall to the pathophysiological phases, because at the time you develop respiratory insufficiency and therefore pneumonia, you just got over from the viral phase, and so that's where you should stop considering antivirals, because virus, I mean, replicated as much as it could, and then it's the time when you should deal with the immune system. And so glucocorticoids, if you please don't hesitate if in front of you have a patient with which is a confirmed case and do require oxygen, don't breathe well in room air, please give them 6 milligrams of dexamethasone up to 10 days. That's something you can do knowing that you are actually improving the survival chances of this person. And okay, then you say the side effects. Of course, I'm not here to deny the side effects of the steroids, but what we know is that in this case, benefits are much wider than harms in this particular case. And that's it. That's more or less what we do today. You are in a hospital because you require supplemental oxygen therapy. And then the first thing you do is you put dexamethasone. As you see, it's like there is always dexamethasone. And if you have it, you can consider like remdesivir, which is another antiviral, more specific for hospitalized patients, but also of a discussed utility, because like when people comes to the hospital, usually they just underwent viral replication, like they are just viral replication it's already finished. So let's say that it's for those patients who are at day 2 or 3 or 4 of disease with very high fever. Okay, those are the patients which you should consider an antiviral, but otherwise you should consider dexamethasone. And then if you have it for more severe patients, for patients who experience what is called a rapid respiratory deterioration, so which means that today I need 2 liters per minute of oxygen, and maybe tomorrow I need 4 liters, and like if you experience that your patient like as an increasing demand, a rapidly increasing demand of oxygen, this is a patient that is going toward a critical disease. And since this critical disease is always due to inflammation, if you can consider other immunomodulatory drugs like tocilizumab or baricitinib, or even if you like, this is kind of off-label, but like since the point is to stop the inflammation, you can consider even higher doses of corticosteroids. Well, let's go to the first clinical case, which is, okay, now I will present you 2 very bad clinical cases. I believe I have more or less 10 minutes left, something like that. And so the first clinical case is a 60 years old man, like overweight, obese, with hypertension and diabetes mellitus. So is more or less the perfect picture of the high risk male, obesity, hypertension, diabetes mellitus is the perfect picture of the high-risk category. It's not old, it's young. That's the only difference. And what did he do? Okay, first he completed the vaccination with Pfizer, like more or less 1 week before, 10 days before the hospitalization. But what did he do is that on like few days before developing the first symptoms, he went to watch Italy, Belgium to this pub, which is like is where a cluster of COVID cases was later identified, and like numbers went until 128 cases, and one of this person attending this football match was our patient. And well, it's he arrived in a very from the very first sight you could see that he was in a state of respiratory distress, because he had like, he was a high heart rate, he had like 30 respiratory acts per minute, and as you can see, the chest radiography was this one, which is very, very, very bad chest radiography. And the first arterial blood gas test we made was was really terrifying. Like he had a from the beginning, from the very first presentation, he had a very bad respiratory insufficiency, a critical respiratory insufficiency. There is this, do you know what is this? This P on F, do you know what is this number?
No.
Okay, well, it's a super important number for us, which drives a lot of clinical decisions, and it's the ratio between the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood, which is this one, 51.9 millimeters of mercury, and the fraction of inhaled oxygen, which is this one. So actually, if you take 22 and you divide it for 0.6, because 60%, like 0.6, you actually have this number here, 86. So it's very important because it tells you more. It tells you in quite precise fashion manner how the lungs of your patients are working, because I mean how much they are capable to exchange gases with the environment, and it doesn't change. Like if you change this number, also this one will change, and more or less the P on F will remain the same, more or less. So it gives you a picture of the lung capacity, of the lung function. And okay, so we started with all the therapy we had. We started with dexamethasone, with enoxaparin, because actually in our protocol we give enoxaparin like 4,000 international units twice a day, or to all severe patients, to prevent like coagulation, let's say, like to contrast the hypercoagulability state that may contribute to the respiratory insufficiency. And we stopped azithromycin because our family doctors, they still give a lot of azithromycin, but like this patient had a positive diagnostic test, and we knew it was COVID. It was not chlamydia or mycoplasma or whatever. So we stopped azithromycin. And after 4 hours, we made another arterial blood gas test. And we saw that the situation was more or less the same. Like the ratio of oxygen we augmented the oxygen after this first one, and so the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood raised above the level of sufficiency, which is 60, and more or less the P on F was more or less the same. Okay, and this was the chest CT scan. Yeah, there is somebody who wants to. There is a radiologist. What do you think about this?
Hello.
This CT scan. Hello.
There is bilateral widespread ground glass. I can see some crazy paving, especially on the left side.
Yeah. And would you think that is how would you rate it in your mind? Because like it's in your opinion,
severe.
Yeah.
All the lobe, all the segments are involved.
Yeah. Actually,
there is a score.
This is, in my experience, one of the most devastating CT scan I've ever seen. Like, it strongly impressed me because there was hardly one proportion of lung left. And as you said, also our radiologists documented a crazy paving pattern, some consolidation, a lot of ground glass. This was really terrifying, this image. So we started tocilizumab, which is one of those immunomodulatory drugs that you reserve for that subset of patients who develop a rapid respiratory decompensation. And despite of dexamethasone, enoxaparin, and tocilizumab, the following morning he couldn't breathe again, and so he was transferred to the intensive care unit to undergo mechanical ventilation. He stayed there for a while, for 20 days more or less, in which he developed ventilator-associated pneumonia by Staphylococcus aureus, also a resistant one. Also, I ask you infectious disease doctor question. Do you have a lot of methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus in your center?
No, this is the answer from our laboratory.
Okay, because we are struggling with a lot of MRSA, especially from patients going in intensive care units, and we know that is a very, very bad infection that contributes to of course, to worsen the expectations of the patient. And in this case, starting from such a bad picture, it's even if prompt antibiotic therapy was started, a few days later, like the intubation, the patient underwent extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, and then unfortunately he died. The clinical case 2 is another male patient, always 63 years old, and not overweight, like 83 kilos. He doesn't have any disease. Okay. And now wait, because so this patient, it presents to you with fever and with like no respiratory insufficiency. And this is his chest CT scan. So it's chest radiography, which is more or less normal. Okay, maybe you already read it, but what would you do on a therapeutic side, like to a patient like this?
Sorry, I'm still on the other image of the first patient.
Yeah, I came because unfortunately, otherwise you can read the answer. But let's say a patient with no non-communicable disease, with no risk factors, quite young, 63 years old, that comes with you at the 4th day of the disease with high fever and no lung involvement. What do you do?
Thank you, Dr. Francesco. You're asking exactly the management or investigative stages or the differential of the condition, because in terms of the patient age category you mentioned and the symptoms above, I would imagine it would be important for someone to do a rapid COVID test, RDT test for COVID.
Okay, very well. You do the test and the test is positive. Then what do you do?
In terms of the categorization that you mentioned, it's certainly a mild COVID disease because it did not, unless I didn't hear that component. So you would manage it along such a line. You may not need the patient to be admitted, but for close follow-up.
Very well. That's exact. And what would you suggest on a therapeutic side? That's exact what you said so far.
Yes.
The patient asks you, what should I take?
Yeah, you could look at, for example, I would say vitamin C or zinc, and fever, to counter the fever in terms of giving paracetamol. Yeah, I would imagine so. Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Perfect.
Dr. Francesco.
Yeah, I have
to add on to this. You have asked that if the rapid test is negative, what should be done next? We have to subject this patient to a PCR test.
Yeah, if you, I mean, yes, for sure you have to get the diagnosis first. So first you send your patient to get tested, and you say this patient, and we say, let's say that this patient is positive, like his 7-year-old son was positive at home and he's positive as well. He's very worried because he's very scared of COVID, and it tells you, okay, I have no disease, my chest radiography is negative, but I'm still very worried. What should I do? And so Dr. Fred, just right, said.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, well, said I should give you some diet supplementation, some vitamin supplementation, and paracetamol if fever. Okay. Other ideas?
I think you should counsel him, and also, if possible, follow up and monitor his saturation over time, and make sure that he's able to breathe well continuously until he recovers. And also, I think the dietary component, he needs to feed well, he needs to rehydrate himself well, and also self-isolate in terms of minimizing contacts. If at all there are any contacts, then you need to follow them up and ascertain how they are doing.
Precisely. And on the, what would you suggest also during the consultations? What would you suggest? Very important.
Self-isolation.
Yeah. Self-isolation, that's for sure. And some things that very, very important that goes along with self-isolation.
You can't figure it out. What goes together with self-isolation? Temperature monitoring.
Okay. And also super important, you have to recommend the patient to put in quarantine his households and his close contacts.
Okay.
That's super important.
Right.
Maybe it is the single most efficient thing you can do in this scenario. Because doing that, stressing a lot on quarantine, on contact quarantine, you are maybe preventing a lot of spread, because let's say that one of his households is one businessman, an entrepreneur, and he feels very good, he feels completely healthy, but he lives in the same house of this patient. Tomorrow, he goes to work, he has a very important business meeting, and virtually he will infect 20 people.
You're right about that. My question was, Dr. Francesco.
Yeah.
In terms of you identifying the contacts, would it be important for you to subject them to the same test, the close contacts? No, yes, precautionary. Even if they are negative, you will ask them to self-quarantine for that duration of time. But do you think the test is important for them?
Very, thank you for the question. Yes, actually, you have always these two scenarios in front of you. Scenario 1, the contact is a case. Scenario 2, the contact is a suspect case. It's just a contact. So, if like the same, usually what happens here is that the same day you like isolate your case, I mean the patient which is in front of you, this one, you all the households get tested as soon as they can. So either they are already cases, and of course they should isolate if they are positive, but if they are negative, they are okay, maybe they are not confirmed cases, but they are still close contacts. So even if as soon as possible the households get the test, the roommates get, the sons, the daughter, the wife, they all get tested, and somehow the result's negative, they still are close contacts, and they still should self-quarantine themselves. Because, and then how could you release them?
In terms of releasing them from quarantine?
Yeah.
I think you should repeat the test towards the end of the second week.
So at the
PCR
testing, which day? The day 14 from the diagnosis, you say?
Yes, I would imagine so. Around from the 10th day towards the 14th day. For example, if you get to know the contact, the first case today, and you've tested the rest and they are negative, mandatorily you'll have to ask them to self-quarantine for 14 days, I would imagine. So anytime from the 10th day, you'll be able to actually do this test and confirm whether they are positive or not. But most importantly, at the 14th day, they should be able to also confirm that they are negative by actually having a PCR test done.
Okay, that's a very prudent strategy. It's true, it's super safe, but actually you can also like remove the quarantine around the 10th day, like the day 10. If they are vaccinated even before, but let's say that no household is vaccinated, you can tell them to perform a test on the day 10. Today, I make the diagnosis of this man, 60 years old man. Today, I put in quarantine all his close contacts. At the day 10 from today, so it will be the 3rd of October, I can repeat a test to the house, the close contacts, and then if they are negative, they can come back to social life. So that's very prudent what you say, Dr. Fred. But actually, you can. We know that we can do it also the day 10 to avoid 4 days of maybe stay at home, be stressed, not working, and etc. But this man, okay, coming back to our case, this man actually was admitted to the hospital because he was super stressed, he was super anxious, and we couldn't send it back to home. So we admitted him. Let's say on the first day of hospitalization, it's actually the 4th day of the disease. It's admitted. He has a negative chest radiography, and it's not a perfect arterial blood gas test, because you would expect from a 60 years old to have like 80, 70 or 80 of partial pressure of oxygen, but you said, okay, I don't put oxygen. I watchful waiting. He has fever, so as you said, paracetamol, enoxaparin, and stop azithromycin, that also this patient started, and stop delta-cortene, stop the steroids, because his family doctor told him, okay, you have COVID, take steroids. No, if you don't have lung involvement, you don't need steroids because they can be harmful for you, and so we stop them. But what happens, this is the day 4 of the disease. This is the CT scan, which is not negative. As you can see, here you have some dysventilation, maybe some mild ground glass. Here, some mild consolidation. It's not negative, but it's not enough to require a supplemental oxygen. This patient could have been discharged that day. But what happens? 2 days, 2 days later, it develops a new set of symptoms. So we are on the day of the disease, more or less 8. And the symptoms are like, that is tachypnoic, like 27 respiratory acts per minute. And he has crackles at the lung sound, you like with the shoes, like Velcro crackles, which is very typical. And you perform a new arterial blood gas test, and you see that a respiratory insufficiency develops. So you actually testify, you actually were present at the shift from the viral phase, in which he had 38 fever, room air, 99% respiratory room air, at a second phase in which pneumonia kicks in. And on day 9 of the disease, so the following day, one day, today I put the oxygen, the following day I perform a new CT scan, and that's what we see. No, sorry, actually this CT scan, we performed it several days after, because it's already very, very consolidated. But actually, on day 9 of the disease, the patient develops respiratory insufficiency, and we start dexamethasone. So we did something that might appear strange, because we stopped it before and then we reinserted it, but actually is what we are supposed to do, because when you have not oxygen, you should not administer dexamethasone or any kind of steroid to the patient, but as soon as it develops the respiratory insufficiency, the lung involvement, you must insert steroids to the therapy. That's very important, because it's there you know that you are improving his survival chances at that time. Well, and this goes for a long, in the case of these patients, this pneumonia goes for a long time, and more or less on the day 17, we make a new CT scan, because we didn't want to overcharge him with radiation, so we waited a little bit. And we saw that the pneumonia, you see here, we see the classic pattern of consolidated COVID, which is when the ground glass, it's more organized. Actually, it's also called organizing pneumonia. Please, if there is some correction by the radiologists, don't hesitate. Like, it's a situation in which we typically see that from the ground glass, then you pass from the more frank consolidation. And well, I'm running a little bit out of time. This was the CT scan at the day 17, in which his P on F was 180, which stands for a severe, respiratory insufficiency, not an RDS, but still, it didn't. Unfortunately, it didn't require. Unlike the other patient, it didn't require the admission to an ICU, but still, he underwent a very bad pneumonia, and he did his 10 days of dexamethasone. He was discharged more or less on day 30, and still we discharged him with with still some symptoms. And the most interesting aspect of this patient, first, is that we saw actually the new onset of the pneumonia, like the moment where you shifted from the viral phase, paracetamol, to the pneumonic phase, let's say the hyperinflammatory state, and then immunosuppressive drugs like dexamethasone. Then we saw that this pneumonia was left his lungs even after 1 month from the onset of symptoms in a suboptimal shape, let's say, because otherwise healthy person, 60 years old, with no known comorbidities, went home with some oxygen. I mean, this one was his last arterial blood gas test, and it was still insufficient. I mean, still suboptimal for a person his age. I mean, if disease was resting, but if it goes for a stroll or for a small exercise of any kind, like he tries to climb the stairs, the 62 becomes a 56, 53. And so he had 60 years old, after 1 month, he had to go home with oxygen. And this oxygen was then stopped after almost 2 months. Yeah. And so, okay, this is my last slide.
Just a moment, Dr. Francesco. Certainly, these CT scans, I think you were able to do them at leisure because you had them in place. For a hard-to-reach or limited resources region such as Sub-Saharan Africa and Uganda inclusive, what is this one test that you'd prefer for all COVID patients in terms of imaging is concerned? Because practically at the facility, we found it was better, one, to weigh out right from the point of admission of such a patient. Then you're able to even classify with the CT scan as you presented. Our challenge is we don't have any options of trying to follow them clinically, because then they may become very unwell to the extent that we cannot transfer them for any investigation, such as CT scan is concerned.
Thank you for the question, Dr. Fred. Is a super good question. But actually, I put a lot of CT scan images because they are beautiful to see, I think, and they can also represent the situation in, like, you can discuss them because they are really like picturing the lung situation. But we don't take many decisions over the CT scan. Like, we do them mostly because we want to see the extent of the disease and like a kind of a prognostic marker, let's say, or because we want to exclude that you don't have an excavation or like a bacterial super infection. But you don't take many decisions over the CT scan. All the decisions are taken on the arterial blood gas test. This is to answer your question, if there is one single test you should perform to all COVID patients coming with respiratory distress symptoms, is an arterial blood gas test, because it's on this one that you take all the therapeutic decisions. Because it was this one that told us that patient needed dexamethasone, for example. And again,
because for us, really, arterial blood gases is unheard of in most cases. More of critical care options. They are available in such settings, ICUs, and so I don't know whether, for example, there is any easier way of having such or doing it.
Okay. Allora I will try to answer again. If an arterial blood gas test is not available, what you should do, and it can be very useful, you can still do almost everything you're supposed to do with your COVID patient, is to follow clinic, which means you have to be very careful. You have to be very smart somehow. Like, you don't have to give the patient more oxygen than the one it needs. I mean, let's say, because if I have a patient who just developed just develop an oxygen saturation of, I am a 60-year-old man, I used to saturate 99, I never smoked, and so I follow the peripheral saturation. And at the day 9, 10 of my disease, I see that I don't saturate 99 anymore, I saturate 93. Okay, maybe that for this patient, the saturation target must be 95. And so I put some oxygen. But I put the minimum quantity of oxygen that the patient requires to reach 96, not more. Because if I put a lot of oxygen more, what happens? It happens that I'm over-oxygening him, and maybe he tolerates it very well. It doesn't suffer that he gets a lot of oxygen, but you cannot follow anymore the disease progression. Because if I give him a lot of oxygen, it can worsen a lot before I notice it. Like, I mean, let's say that when I feel a little bit stressed, I see that my saturation is 93, I have 20% of the lung involved, okay? So the doctor says, puts me 10 liters of oxygen, and I saturate 99. Okay, I'm super relaxed because I saturate 99. But then the pneumonia goes on, and the lung involvement goes to 20%, 30%, 40%, 60%, and I realize it only when I'm 60%. Otherwise, if I put the minimum oxygen to get 96, yes, you would say that you should monitor closely and measure the saturation frequently. Yes, it's true. This is the counterpart. It's true. You have to measure the saturation quite frequently. But this one, it kind of guides on the disease progression, because at some point you will see that it needs 3, 4, 5, 6 liters. Then it stops at 6 liters, and then it starts to go back. So to keep 96. So in the end, it resolves, and it's kind of, you made an arterial blood gas test. Of course, is less precise, but it's kind of, so you can still manage, just with the peripheral saturation. Of course, this is kind of, for us, an extreme case, but that's my suggestion, at least.
Thank you.
If there is something not clear, I will just explain the last slide. I'm super late. I don't know if we have a lot of time left because I feel super late.
Never mind. I think you can go to the last slide. It's fine.
Okay. And if you have other questions, I really appreciated all the questions. So it was very, very pleasing also for me to this exchange. Well, the last slide is one of my favorite slides, because I mean, it's maybe one of the pictures I appreciated the most since the pandemic began. Because now, since vaccine arrived here in Italy, we said, "Oh, Deus ex machina!" Here comes the solution. Actually, it's not like that. And actually, vaccines are the last layer of protection. It's the one closest, because before the vaccines became useful, virus has to cross a lot of barriers, and the Swiss cheese, the metaphor, is the one that you easily cross one Swiss cheese slice because it's full of holes. But if you put in line a lot of Swiss cheese slices with holes in different positions, then no viruses cross all the lines. So it's very important to do all of that, all what we have said in this presentation. So to respect physical distances, to prioritize ventilation, to wear masks in public or in indoor settings, to perform regularly hand hygiene and surface cleaning, to test every time you have a suspect, also according to the availability of tests, of course, to quarantine and isolate, to quarantine the close contacts and to isolate the cases. And then, of course, all the the more structural part of financial support and public health measures and like governmental support. And just the last layer is vaccine. And I will put another layer more, which is at that time, which is therapy, and which is the last layer. So you can see that we have a lot of weapons in our hands, and but we don't have to pick one of them, because the virus, with one of them, with just one weapon, it goes along. I mean, it doesn't care, it crosses easily. But with all of them, no, it can do nothing, almost nothing. And that's how I hope at some point we will get over this situation, this pandemic.